Sunday mornings used to feel like pure warmth and laughter in our home. Before Daniel's accident, our house overflowed with the aroma of freshly baked cinnamon rolls, children's laughter echoing off the walls, and Grandpa Henry's old country tunes drifting through the windows. But after the crash, everything changed. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and my son, 10-year-old Ethan, still carries his dad's easygoing smile and quiet curiosity. But we rarely see the people who once filled our lives with love. At first, the sympathy poured in casseroles placed gently on our doorstep, whispered condolences from Victoria and Linda at family gatherings, and Mark offering to mow our lawn whenever you need. Yet, as weeks turned into months, their kindness dwindled to brief text messages and phone calls that never came. Invitations disappeared entirely. I realized they hadn't accepted me as part of the family. They had only known me as Daniel's wife. Without him, I was a painful reminder of their loss, and soon, I was simply not useful anymore. Now, every time Ethan asks why Grandma never calls or why his cousins don't invite him to play, I search for words I don't have. I know he deserves an answer, but his sadness shames me into silence. As the world outside continues moving forward, I find myself trapped in the loudest kind of loneliness, surrounded by people who pretend I don't exist. And yet, I refuse to let that silence define us. Sunday morning sunlight filtered through my kitchen window as I watched my 10-year-old son, Ethan, fidget with the straps of his backpack. He was excited, innocently hopeful that, perhaps, this Sunday would be different. A few days ago, I had received a text from my sister-in-law. Diane Carter family dinner this Sunday at our house. Sarah. It would mean a lot to Ethan to see his cousins again. My heart had clenched at the message. After losing my husband Daniel in that late summer accident 18 months ago, our extended family's invitations to gatherings dwindled to nothing in those early weeks. Diane had delivered a store-bought casserole to our doorstep, a hug scented with her lavender perfume that I once mistook for genuine comfort. But as the months passed, her messages became shorter and rarer, and the kind offers from my in-laws, Carol and Robert Stevenson, evaporated entirely. I'd come to realize they hadn't welcomed me as part of the family. They had only known me as Daniel's wife. Without him, I was a reminder of their loss. And soon I felt I was no longer useful. Invitations vanished, and even Ethan's birthday parties went uncelebrated by his cousins. Still, every time Ethan asked, "Mom, why doesn't Grandma call anymore? Why doesn't Aunt Diane pick me up to play?" My throat tightened, and I swallowed the words I couldn't speak. I told him the little lies a mother tells to protect her child. "Maybe Grandma's busy. Sweetheart, I'll call her soon." But deep down, I knew there was no simple explanation. I had tried to be patient, believing that silence and kindness might bring them back. Now, when Diane's message arrived, I stared at the screen for a long moment. It felt like bait, an attempt to lure us back, only to remind us how unwelcome we really were. Yet, when I turned to look at Ethan, his eyes had already lit up. He grabbed my hand, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Can we go? Mom, please." He grinned, and at that moment, I knew I could not refuse him, not this time. All morning, I prepared for our return to the house I once called my second home. I measured out 2 cups of flour and 1 cup of sugar for the blueberry muffins I planned to bring, wanting to show that I still cared about family traditions. I ironed a light blue dress, even though it felt like dressing up for a performance where I knew every move would be judged. When we arrived 10 minutes early, the Stevensons' lawn was immaculate green grass trimmed to perfection, flower beds arranged like a magazine photo. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and felt Ethan's small hand tighten around mine as we walked up the front walkway. Diane swung the door open, her smile wide and practiced, her lavender fragrance wrapping around me like a curtain someone was pulling shut. Sarah. "You look wonderful," she said, touching my cheek with what felt like a calculated gesture. I nodded, summoned my own smile, and stepped inside, wondering how long it would take for the illusion of warm welcome to crack. Ethan bounded into the living room, where his cousin Levi was busy stacking Legos on a low table. Their greeting fist bumps and laughter was genuine, and for a moment I felt a pang of hope. But Diane's mother, Carol, stood in the kitchen slicing lemons for iced tea without making eye contact, and Robert sat slouched in his recliner watching football, acknowledging me only with a curt nod before returning to the game. I offered to help set the table, and Diane handed me a salad bowl, but then immediately turned back to Carol to discuss apple pie recipes, as though I did not belong in the conversation. I forced myself to smile and retreated to the kitchen counter. Keeping my gaze on the blue and white china plates in front of me, Ethan's laughter with Levi drifted down the hall, a bittersweet reminder that he still had cousins who loved him, even if their parents had forgotten how to show it. As Diane called everyone to the table, I watched my son take his seat next to Levi and felt a quiet surge of determination. I would remain calm and gracious for Ethan's sake, no matter how they treated me. I reminded myself that this dinner wasn't about proving my worth to people who had already shown their true colors. It was about giving Ethan a chance to feel connected. He looked up at me, smiling, as Diane placed a plate of turkey and mashed potatoes in front of him. I reached around to get my own plate, noting how Diane served Ethan before anyone else, as if to prove to everyone that he was still her nephew. I sat down, took a deep breath, and tucked my hair behind my ear. I hoped that somewhere between those polite but strained smiles, there might be enough warmth left for my son. But I also knew that I would hold on to my pride for him. He deserved to see that his mother would never let him believe that he didn't belong, no matter how loud their silence became. Sunday evening at the Stevenson house felt deceptively normal. The recycled laughter of children drifted from the basement, mingling with the dull thump of a football game playing on muted television in the den. The dining room table was set meticulously with Grandma Carol's blue and white china plates and freshly polished silverware, each place mat-aligned just so. I, Sarah Mitchell, settled gingerly into my seat across from my son, Ethan, who was seated beside his cousin, Levi. The mashed potatoes were steaming, and the scent of roast turkey wafted through the air, but the atmosphere was taut like a bowstring drawn too tight. I reminded myself to stay calm for Ethan's sake. At 10 years old, he still clung to the hope that our family could somehow mend the tears left by his father, Daniel's untimely passing. When Diane Carter, my sister-in-law, stood and tapped her water glass with a spoon, the room fell silent. I straightened my shoulders, forcing a polite smile. Diane's face, once a source of genuine warmth, now wore a practiced expression of concern. She glanced at her husband, Mark, and then back at the gathered relatives, Mom and Dad Carol and Robert Stevenson, cousins Jenna and Marcus, Aunt Linda and her husband Tom. Her voice was measured, as though she had rehearsed every syllable. "I think we all feel some tension in the family," she began, her tone soft but firm. "And it's time we were honest about where it's coming from." I felt my chest tighten. This sounded ominous. Diane continued. She said that, ever since Sarah rejoined our family dinners, things haven't felt the same. We've all had to move forward after Daniel's accident, and maybe some of us are still walking on eggshells. My palms grew sweaty. I breathed deeply, reminding myself to remain composed. Diane turned her gaze toward me, as though I were the subject of a classroom lesson. "We aren't saying you haven't been through a lot, Sarah. We all loved Daniel, and we all grieved him. But maybe it's time we face the fact that having Sarah and Ethan here at every gathering is, well, maybe it's hindering our ability to move on." Her words hung in the air like jagged glass. I closed my eyes momentarily, willing the room not to spin. I opened my eyes to see my mother-in-law, Carol, avoid my gaze. Her lips pressed into a thin line. My father-in-law, Robert, leaned back in his chair with arms folded, his stare fixed on the football game. Jenna fidgeted with her napkin. Marcus adjusted his fork as though it were a shield. No one spoke. No one moved. Diane offered a slow, rehearsed smile. "So," she said, "I thought perhaps we could vote. No hard feelings, just a simple show of hands. Should Sarah be uninvited from future family events? For the sake of peace, who thinks yes?" My heart pounded so loudly I feared they could all hear it. My throat went dry. There was a deafening pause, as though the entire family was waiting for one person to speak first. Then it began. A faint lift of the hand, Mom Carol offering the first quiet gesture of exclusion. Immediately, Robert followed suit without hesitation. Jenna lifted her own hand after a slight glance to her mother. And Marcus, without looking at me, raised his hand as well. Aunt Linda closed her eyes briefly, as though steeling herself, then lifted her fingers. Tom did the same, as did Diane's mother-in-law, Laura, who had come as a guest, in seconds. Every hand was raised, everyone's hand except one Grandpa Henry's. I felt my legs go weak, and the world tilted. My vision blurred as tears threatened to spill. My son, Ethan, looked up at me with confusion. He had just run back into the room from the basement, probably wanting more apple pie, and now he was seeing his mother as if turned into a ghost present yet invisible. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "Why are they doing this?" I forced a smile that felt like shattered glass against my lips. I had no words, no explanation short enough to spare his innocent heart. I took his small hand in mine and stood slowly. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice barely louder than a breath. No one rose to stop me. No one spoke. Grandpa Henry placed his hand on my shoulder, his eyes filled with sorrow and apology. As I guided Ethan toward the door, I felt every pair of eyes follow us, some with indifference, some with relief, and some with an unspoken bitterness. Outside, the warm glow of the porch light felt like a promise of refuge against the cold cruelty inside. Ethan clung to me, his head resting on my arm as I buckled him into his car seat. He didn't say another word. I didn't have to answer. That silence spoke volumes more than any explanation I could give. Driving home, the radio buzzed faintly with an old country song that reminded me of the better Sundays we once had. Sundays full of laughter, garlic bread, and Grandpa Henry's portable speaker playing old Hank Williams records. Now those Sundays seemed like memories from someone else's life. I squeezed Ethan's hand through the rearview mirror, knowing that I would never let him forget that he was loved, that he belonged somewhere that truly welcomed him. When we arrived home, I tucked him into bed and stayed by his side until he fell asleep, listening to the soft rhythm of his breath. I knew then that I had a choice: remain silent and allow my family to erase us, or push back and show Ethan that we could stand tall even in the face of such hurt. As I turned off the bedside lamp, I resolved that no matter how loud their silence became, I would find my own voice for both of us. And in that determination, I discovered that even a lone woman and her small son, without the warmth of an entire extended family, could still carve out a life defined by dignity and love. The moment the vote happened, I felt as though I had been struck by lightning. As Diane Carter, my sister-in-law, tapped her glass and announced, "Let's be honest about why things feel awkward since Sarah and Ethan joined us again." A hush fell over the Stevenson dining room. I, Sarah Mitchell, sat at the table across from my 10-year-old son, Ethan, who had come running back inside from the basement, eager for a second slice of pie, in his bright eyes. There was hope he still believed our family could heal. But when Diane suggested a show of hands to decide whether I should be uninvited from future gatherings, I knew in that instant that healing was not on their agenda. At first, no one moved. I felt my heartbeat thundering in my chest as I stared at the polish on the silverware. A sudden vertigo overtook me, a dizzying swirl of confusion, shame, and disbelief. Then, ever so slowly, my mother-in-law, Carol Stevenson, lowered her eyes and lifted her hand. My father-in-law, Robert, immediately followed, folding his arms but still raising his fingers. Cousin Jenna and her husband, Marcus, raised their hands, and Aunt Linda and Uncle Tom did the same. Even Helena, Diane's in-law, who was merely visiting for the weekend, lifted her own hand in a perfunctory gesture. Every single person in that room, except Grandpa Henry, the only family member who ever really saw me as more than Daniel's widow, raised a hand against me. I felt all the blood drain from my face as the air twisted around me. Ethan's voice broke through my haze. "Mom, why are they doing this?" His question was simple, but its weight crushed me. In the split second before I answered, I realized that I could no longer pretend nothing was happening. There was too much at stake: my dignity, my son's sense of belonging, and our right to live without constant humiliation. I forced a small, tremulous smile. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. I rose from the table, clutching Ethan's hand. No one protested. No one offered an explanation or a single word of comfort. Even Diane, who orchestrated this vote, did not bother to follow us into the entryway. As we walked toward the front door, Grandpa Henry leaned over and whispered, "You don't deserve this, Sarah." Neither does Ethan. His words, soft but unwavering, were the only kindness I felt that night. In the car, I watched Ethan curl into his seat, his head resting on my arm. He was too young to understand the complexity of adult cruelty, but old enough to feel it. I locked the doors and sat for a long moment, grappling with the shock. I knew then that this vote was no random act of cruelty. It was the culmination of months, maybe years, of small, cutting remarks and passive-aggressive suggestions aimed at pushing us out. My silence had been interpreted as weakness. By keeping my head down, I had unwittingly allowed them to believe they could erase me without consequence. Back at home, I tucked Ethan into bed and watched him drift off, the steady rhythm of his breathing a balm to my raw heart. In the darkness, I replayed Diane's words, the raised hands, and Ethan's broken question. I felt anger rise up, but it was tempered by a fierce determination. Enough was enough. I would not allow my son to believe that he, and by extension, I didn't deserve respect. The vote wasn't just a rejection of me. It was an attempt to humiliate Ethan in front of everyone he loved. That realization broke something open inside me. It was late when I finally sat at my kitchen table, the low hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Every memory of that night was etched in my mind, the way the polished oak table hid their contempt, the weight of their eyes as they watched me stand, and the quiet relief I saw flicker across Diane's face when I finally left. I opened my laptop and searched for a law firm specializing in family disputes and emotional abuse. As the cursor blinked on the screen, I allowed myself to imagine a different kind of Sunday, one in which Ethan didn't wake up dreading cold shoulders, but rather looking forward to a morning filled with genuine love. By 3:00 a.m., I had drafted an email to attorney Danica Rhodes, attaching screenshots of Diane's text messages and even an audio clip from Ethan's smartwatch, which had recorded Diane's demand for a vote. My hands shook as I clicked send. But underneath the tremor was a steady core of resolve. I would use every tool at my disposal to protect my son, my priority above all else. In that moment of quiet resolve, I felt an ember of power ignite, For the first time since Daniel's accident. I refused to stay silent. The vote may have shocked me, but it also awakened a courage I didn't know I possessed. And I vowed to make them understand my son and I were here to stay. Late that night, after tucking Ethan into bed and listening to the soft, even rise and fall of his breathing, I slipped out of our bedroom and made my way to the dimly lit living room. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling floorboards. I sat at the coffee table, pulled my laptop close, and opened the folder I hadn't touched in months. Inside were screenshots, voice memos, and old text messages. Tangible fragments of a growing tapestry of exclusion and manipulation I'd endured since Daniel's accident. I clicked on the first file, a string of text messages from Diane Carter, my sister-in-law. The display read, "You don't have to come to Ethan's recital. It might be awkward for everyone." I pierced my lips together, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. I had once brushed off comments like these as overly cautious or unintentional, but seeing it now, in cold black and white, stung like betrayal. I scrolled down to another message from Carol Stevenson. "My mother-in-law. Maybe it's better if you drop him off at the party and leave right away. No one wants any drama." The phrasing was polite, but unmistakably dismissive. My hands trembled as I moved to the next file, a voice recording captured by Ethan's smartwatch. I tapped play. Diane's voice, clipped and condescending, floated through my speakers. "I think we need to be honest about why things feel awkward. Maybe it's best if Sarah stops coming to family events. It'll be easier for everyone to move on." Her words rang in my ears like a gavel striking a bench final and irrevocable. I pressed pause, took a deep breath, and reminded myself that this was not simply a mother-in-law's hasty comment, but evidence of a sustained campaign to push me and my son out of the life Daniel had built for us. For too long, I'd allowed their polite dismissals and passive-aggressive hints to wash over me. I'd smiled and nodded, hoping that silence would preserve peace. But silence had become a shield for their cruelty. Now, I resolved. It was time to take action. I opened a new document in my laptop's notes app and began typing a list of every way they had excluded me calls left unanswered. Invitations that never arrived, whispered criticisms about my parenting, and most damningly, the vote to uninvite me in front of my son. Each bullet point felt like laying a foundation, brick by brick, for the justice I was determined to seek on behalf of my son and myself. When the list reached a point where the screen scrolled automatically, I paused. I felt fatigued, as though I'd run a marathon without moving an inch. But beneath the exhaustion was a spark of resolve that pulsed stronger than any fear. I searched online for family law attorneys in our area, women who specialized in emotional abuse, defamation, and the right of a child to maintain meaningful relationships with both parents. After a few clicks, I found a firm whose website emphasized protecting vulnerable families from harassment and alienation. My fingers hovered over the Contact Us button. I drafted an email to attorney Danica Rhodes. In it, I detailed the timeline, the initial sympathy after Daniel's accident, the gradual erosion of kindness over 18 months, and the calculated vote to exclude me at that Sunday dinner. I attached screenshots of Diane's text messages and Carol's suggestions, as well as the audio file from Ethan's smartwatch. My words were measured but firm. I would no longer tolerate a toxic environment that threatened my son's emotional well-being. I pressed send, feeling a mixture of trepidation and relief. The click echoed in the quiet room like a declaration I was no longer silent. Within 24 hours, I received a response. Danica's email was concise but reassuring. She had reviewed the materials and believed I had a strong case to demand a cease and desist on behalf of Ethan. She also mentioned the possibility of involving Child Protective Services if the family persisted in creating a hostile environment. For the first time since Daniel's death. I felt empowered. I could protect my son's innocence rather than letting him absorb the sting of being treated as an unwelcome guest in a home that had once welcomed him. Over the next 2 days, I worked closely with Danica's team to refine the evidence. We created a timeline that chronicled each slight, each isolating text, and the recorded vote that so publicly humiliated us. By Thursday morning, the law firm had mailed sealed cease and desist letters to every adult who had raised a hand that night. Each envelope was addressed personally, Diane Carter, 745 Maplewood Drive, Carol Stevenson, 127 Oak Terrace, Robert Stevenson, same address, and so on. I did not inform anyone the letters were coming. I simply went about my usual routine, packing lunches, driving Ethan to school, and preparing for my own workday. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with missed calls. First, a call from Carol, then a text from Robert. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." And finally, a terse message from Diane. "You actually went to a lawyer. You're tearing our family apart over a stupid dinner." I did not reply. Instead, I focused on the gentle rise and fall of Ethan's chest when he came home from school. He chattered about a new art project and a novel he was reading in class, blissfully unaware of the legal storm that was unfolding on his behalf. The next morning, Grandpa Henry called. "Your lawyer gave them all a serious shock," he said, chuckling softly. I've never seen Diane so quiet. I felt a surge of gratitude for him, his kindness, his willingness to stand by us. "Thank you, Dad," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "I just want Ethan to feel safe." As the days passed without another invitation or word from the others, I realized that the silence of those who had voted against me was louder than any apology they might offer. But for the first time in 18 months, I woke up without that familiar pit of dread in my stomach. My son, once anxious about unanswered calls and missed birthday cards, began to relax. We built new Sunday traditions, a modest donut-solving ritual at our local bakery, followed by a walk around the nearby lake, where Ethan sketched ducks and cloud formations in his notebook. He seemed lighter, more himself. I also began attending therapy, an act I once saw as unnecessary, but now understood as essential. My counselor helped me name what had happened: emotional alienation, manipulation, and the calculated effort to isolate me. Understanding those words brought a clarity I hadn't known I needed. It allowed me to forgive myself for staying silent too long and to find compassion for those who had hurt me, who were themselves trapped by fear and grief. In protecting my son, I discovered my own strength. I realized that standing up to family abuse did not make me cold or vengeful. It made me a mother willing to fight for my child's right to emotional safety and belonging. And while the family I once thought I'd always have has grown distant, I know that, in stepping away, I have found a truer sense of freedom. Ethan and I are not erased. We are building a life that honors Daniel's memory and protects our joy. And in doing so, I am teaching my son that silence is not always noble sometimes. Defending your heart is the strongest act of love you can show. By mid-morning on Friday, a strange hush had fallen over the Stevenson household, an absence that rang louder than any angry outburst could have. It began the moment the cease and desist letters from Rhodes family law, addressed to every adult who raised a hand in that humiliating vote, arrived in their mailboxes. I carried on with my usual routine, waking before sunrise to make pancakes for Ethan, packing his lunch, and seeing him off to school while the Stevensons awoke to silence in their own home. First came the missed call from Carol. A moment later, a text message from Robert appeared. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." A minute after that, my phone buzzed again. Diane, in all caps, "Seriously, a lawyer. You're tearing our family apart over a stupid dinner." I didn't reply. I had nothing to say that would mend 18 months of carefully orchestrated exclusion. I focused instead on preparing for my day. I set a pot of coffee to brew and unloaded my email inbox. In the corner of my mind, I wondered whether anyone in their house had even opened the letters. Would they see the bolded transcript of Diane's voice? Maybe it's best if Sarah stops coming to family events highlighted with precise timestamps from Ethan's smartwatch. Would they register the weight of proof showing that what I'd endured was no accident or harmless oversight, but a deliberate campaign to erase me and my son from their lives? That afternoon, I brought Ethan home from school. He bounded down the driveway, whistling that tune he'd heard on the radio. For a brief moment, I saw the boy who had once slept curled against my side at night, eyes bright with possibility, a sponge for every new experience. Despite it all, he arrived home enthusiastic as ever, chattering about a science project with a looming deadline. I crouched to meet his gaze. "Hey, champ, how was school?" He shrugged and gave me a half smile. "Okay, I guess." He paused, as though he was measuring his words. "Did Grandma and Grandpa call me today?" My heart sank at the question. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and knelt beside him. "Not yet, buddy. They're probably busy." He nodded, but the frown on his face told me he didn't really believe that. That evening, as I tucked him into bed, Ethan curled himself against my side. "Mom, do you think they miss us?" he asked quietly. I felt the lump rise in my throat. I kissed the top of his head and smoothed his hair. "Maybe," I whispered. "But missing someone doesn't always mean you treat them right." His breathing steadied as sleep claimed him, and I lay beside him in the dim glow of his nightlight. Watching him sleep, I realized that the peace I'd fought for wasn't just mine, it was his. On Saturday morning, Grandpa Henry called. His voice crackled with amusement over the speakerphone. "Your lawyer gave them all heart attacks," he said, chuckling. "I've never seen Diane go stone cold silent like that." I exhaled, a weight lifting off my chest. "I'm just glad someone finally made them think twice," I replied. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," he said softly. "You did the right thing. That child of yours deserves more than half-hearted greetings and rehearsed smiles." His words warmed me like sunshine breaking through clouds. I grasped the phone tightly. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." He paused, his tone shifting to gentle admonishment. "Your son, though he saw them throw you out in front of everyone, he might not understand all the details, but he'll feel it. Be gentle with him." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I will," I promised, my voice steady. That weekend, with invitations still as empty as their apologies, I decided to forge new traditions for Ethan and me. On Sunday morning, we drove to the local bakery and each selected our favorite donut maple for me. Chocolate frosted for him. We sat on a bench by the lakeside park, birds swooping overhead and the water rippling in the gentle breeze. Ethan unpacked his sketchbook and pencils, drawing ducks and distant sailboats. I sipped my coffee, watching him work, and felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in months. "Mom," he said, looking up from his drawing, "I like this." He gestured at the tranquil scene around us, the way the sunlight danced on the water, the smell of fresh coffee from my travel mug mingling with the sweet aroma of donuts. "Can we do this every Sunday?" I smiled, my eyes filling with tears I refused to shed in front of him. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "Every Sunday." It was a pact no more pretending that being tolerated by people who disguised cruelty as civility was acceptable. We would choose joy and make space for our own peace. During the following week, I began attending therapy. At first, I was hesitant. I'd always thought therapy was for people who couldn't hold themselves together. But sitting across from Dr. Keller, I realized that healing was not a sign of weakness. It was an investment in resilience. We talked about the subtle ways emotional abuse can masquerade as family dynamics and how silence can be mistaken for compliance, naming the long pattern of disdain, the whispered criticisms of my parenting, the exclusion from decisions. The calculated vote brought clarity and a sense of release. At home, I noticed changes in myself and in Ethan. He stopped glancing at the mailbox every afternoon, hoping for a belated invitation. He no longer asked why his cousins never invited him to play. Instead, he took pride in our new routine Sunday mornings. Donuts and lake sketches. He began making friends at the park, kids whose parents recognized the honesty in his laughter and invited him to picnics and playground adventures. On a Friday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Diane's number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause on her end. "Sarah?" she began, her tone softer than I'd heard before. "I'm sorry. I held up a hand, not wanting to hear yet another hollow apology. In that moment, I realized I didn't need her forgiveness. I needed to protect my son. "I'm doing fine, Diane," I said quietly. "I hope you will be, too." I hung up before she could protest. Afterward, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my reflection in the window. The woman staring back felt different, stronger, unburdened, and clear-eyed. I thought about how I had once let silence become my prison, believing that being the quiet one kept the peace. But that peace had always been fragile, built on the false assumption that enduring mistreatment was noble, in choosing to speak up. I had discovered a new kind of power, one rooted in love and dignity rather than fear or obligation. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he asked, "Do you think they hate me?" "Too." My heart cracked at the question. I brushed a lock of hair from his forehead and sat on the edge of his bed. "No, baby," I said firmly. "They don't hate you. They didn't know how to show you love. But that's okay. We're finding people who do." I kissed his cheek and turned off the light. Lying awake in the dark, I reflected on our journey. I realized that true family is not guaranteed by blood or tradition. It is earned through kindness, respect, and genuine concern for one another's well-being. My son and I had lost one version of family that Sunday night, but in its place, we had built something far more enduring, a bond defined by mutual trust and joy, and the courage to walk away from toxicity. As the days turned into weeks, the silence from the Stevensons persisted. They neither invited us back nor apologized in person, but their absence no longer haunted me. Instead, it served as a reminder that I had choices to accept half-hearted inclusions or to step boldly into a space where we were truly valued. Every Sunday morning, as Ethan and I made our pilgrimage to the bakery and the lakeside bench, I felt the old ache in my chest soften. I saw the sky lighten with possibility, and I knew that for my son's sake and for my own, I had chosen a path defined by love, honesty, and, ultimately, freedom. The story of our exile had become the story of our escape, and in that escape, we had discovered the quiet strength that comes from standing up for yourself and safeguarding the heart of the only family that truly matters, the one you choose to build. Sarah Mitchell gazed out at the morning sunrise, feeling a warmth she hadn't known in months, after walking away from a family that tried to erase her and her son, Ethan. She discovered something essential. True belonging isn't dictated by blood. It's built through kindness, respect, and genuine care. Each Sunday morning, she and Ethan ritualistically visited the local bakery for donuts before settling on a bench by the lake, sharing stories and capturing the beauty of the moment in Ethan's sketchbook. Sarah realized that their exile wasn't a loss, but an escape from half-hearted greetings and forced politeness to a life where joy and authenticity flourished. She learned that silence isn't always noble. Sometimes, breaking the quiet barrier is the most powerful form of love. For seniors, this story holds a mirror to our own lives. Perhaps you've known the sting of being sidelined or the pain of watching loved ones choose convenience over compassion. Sarah's journey reminds us that age and tradition don't obligate us to accept mistreatment. We have permission, no matter our years, to set boundaries, to speak up when silence compounds our wounds, and to cultivate new circles of care. Her strength wasn't in loud confrontations, but in the quiet resolve to protect her son's innocence and her own dignity. If this resonates with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to set boundaries to preserve your well-being? And if you'd like more stories about resilience, family, and the quiet power of love, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that truly matter.